Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here on YouTube, and welcome to another Friday review. And today I am reviewing Out of the Ashes Into the Fire, the comeback album from Swedish cult metal band Axewitch, which was released through Pure Steel Records on April 30th. Yes, long-awaited comeback album. Their first album in pretty much definitely over 30 years at this point, because the very last album was released in 1985, titled Hooked on High Heels. So, where do I really begin with Axewitch? If you're not familiar with these guys, then you know what, let me try and bring you guys up to speed. These guys, again, are Swedish, which they are from Linköping, Östergötland. I hope I pronounced that correctly. If I didn't, you know what, you can bash me all you want in the comments. Again, I apologize for all of that. And they were originally formed in 1979 under the name Hazy, but then changed their name to Axewitch in 1981 and released their debut demo in 1982, which at least two of the songs, being Nightmare and Axewitch, being both featured on their respectable Swedish compilations. Then, of course, releasing their debut EP in 1982 titled Pray for Metal. Then in 1983, through Fingerprint Records, they released their debut full-length album, which is this one right here, The Lord of Flies. And then, of course, in 1984, they released Visions of the Past, I believe also through Fingerprint, but then also being released through Roadrunner as well in certain parts of the nation. And of course, then finally, their very last album coming out in 1985, Hooked on High Heels, with only featured at least 3 or 2 of the original members, being, of course, the singer Anders Wallentoft. So here we are. Goddamn, definitely over 30 years passed since 1985. So here we are. Out of the Ashes Into the Fire. Again, these guys, of course, pretty much were inactive since at least since 1987, but then since 1991. Again, they were supposed to have released an album in 1987 or 86, but that really didn't see the light of day until I think some of the reissues for some of these albums, those songs. Then finally they briefly got back together again in 1991. Then in 2007 they have been active since. So let's just get into it. Since we of course are taking a little bit too much time, let's get into, of course, my thoughts on their comeback album and how it holds up to any of their albums from, of course, 1982 to 1984. Yeah, I'm not counting Hooked on High Heels. So let's get into my thoughts on Out of the Ashes Into the Fire from Axewitch. Alright, so before I really get into any of my thoughts on this album, you know what I have to do? I have to do a track listing rundown so I can tell you what songs are on this album. So, depending on which copy you guys will end up picking up, whether it be the CD or vinyl copy, the track list is going to be a little bit more different, maybe more shorter, because on the vinyl copy, you only have at least 10 songs, and with those 10 songs, it all clocks in at 49 minutes and 28 seconds. However, if you were to buy this on CD, you would get 2 additional songs, which then making the track listing, at least its running time, to be about 57 minutes and 52 seconds, so it would be definitely much longer. So let's definitely get the, let me definitely run through these songs here. So, what we have here for these 12 songs are The Pusher, In Pitch Black Darkness, Dues to Pay, Let Sleeping Dogs Lie, Boogie of Death, yes, Boogie of Death, Losing You, Going Down, The Healer, Lie to Me, Violator. So there's at least your 10 songs that you would end up seeing on the vinyl pressing of this album. So the 2 additional songs that are for the CD copy of the album, since you probably can see the track listing anyways on your screen, at least on your left side. The 2 additional songs are basically re-recordings of their 2 songs that featured on their very first demo and the 2 Swedish compilations, that being Nightmare and the song Axewitch. So there we go. There's your 12 songs. You know, I have been so familiar with these guys. When I really began getting into the more obscure sort of Swedish heavy metal stuff, you know, I'll get bands like Heavy Load, and though I didn't really get into 220 volt till many years later, but I was getting into them. Torch, Gotham City, and I think that there's a few other bands I'm kind of forgetting a little bit, but really that's to give you the good examples. I was just really getting into that sort of stuff. And Axewitch was one of those bands I was really definitely getting into, and I loved, you know, the Pray for Metal EP, and then of course the Lord of Flies and Visions of the Past. Hooked on High Heels was definitely more of a different album. That was them trying their best to see if they can break into the American market, which didn't really do well. It obviously failed, but they were trying to make it into the American market with the sort of LA, since at the time a lot of the LA glam metal or hair metal or heavy metal stuff, depending on what you want to refer it to as, was that sort of MTV era metal stuff. That sound was becoming more popular again with the bands like Rat and Cinderella, and of course, though they wouldn't get any big until '86 actually. But of course, you know, again, Dawkins. And just sort of that sound was becoming a lot more popular, and I think Axewitch decided that they wanted to kind of take their jab at it, or at least their dab into it. I want to say jab because that means that they wanted to actually shit on it, but that wasn't. They wanted to kind of take that sound and break in, but it didn't work. So it obviously failed for them, and then they tried to at least release an album a year or two later, but they scrapped it, and then they were done until 1991, and then they were just active for a long time until 2007. But basically for at least close to 2 decades. So many years after them getting back together, they come back with this album. And I mean, it took a long time for this album to seem like to actually come out, because there was always, I think, were some hints on them really putting out a new album. And here we are, though. Here we are with Out of the Ashes into the Fire. It finally came true. And, you know, I really have to be somewhat honest. When I put this album on for the first time to listen to it, I was surprised. I mean, just from the pusher to even to the very, because right now I won't focus on the 2 bonus tracks, okay? I'm just focusing on the 10 original songs for this review here. So basically, from the Pusher up to Violator, I was just surprised how good this album is and how it actually stacks up to some of their more earlier albums. Because of, I mean, just from the Pusher to then the more methodical and slow broodingness of In Pitch Black Darkness. My God, this is almost as good, if not maybe more mature and more tighter than their first 3 releases, being Pray for Metal, The Lord of Flies, and Visions of the Past. I mean, it's that heart, that soul is still there of those albums. It's still present, but the attack is a lot in the sort of composite. That's the musicianship and the attack is a lot tighter compared to those albums. Of course, because of since we're in modern times still, they definitely kind of modern up a little bit of sort of the production or tone. It's definitely more modern production, so it kind of does have a lot more of a heaviness compared to any of their earlier albums. But at the same time, the spirit is still there. So everything still sounds like Axewitch just in 2021. And I think, if anything, this is almost more of a better follow-up to Visions of the Past than Hooked on High Heels was. I mean, of course, we only have 4/5 of the original members, because bass player Tommy Barrage, I think it was his name, is not on this album. So he's the only one that's pretty much missing from this lineup. But vocalist Andrew Wallentoff actually sounds probably at times just as good as he did on any of the early albums, like The Lord of Flies and so on. He still sounds good, but maybe a lot tighter in his performance too. He really sounds good on this album. Actually, everyone sounds fucking tight on here. Again, the Pusher, which is a straight up, very upbeat, energetic opener, it really kicks the album off in the high gear. Then, of course, in Pitch Black Darkness, which begins with the sounds like rain, sort of rain sounds, and then very clean guitar tone before busting into more of a straight up, very slow and very brooding, methodical track. But it still is very anthemic sounding, and it's definitely it's definitely not as fast, but it still has some energy packed to it. It still sounds inspired. It is definitely a great track. But from there, we still have plenty of fucking scorching metal tracks like Let Sleeping Dogs Lie, Boogie of Death, which is kind of a funny kind of track. But again, it's, I guess because of its pacing and beat is very boogie-like, but it's still again very classic Axewitch in many ways. But it still has more of a maturity to it. It still sounds heavy, and it still is a good track. Then Losing You, which actually reminds me of something that would have been on The Lord of Flies. Actually, again, it would have been at a place off of an album like The Lord of the Flies. Then, of course, Going Down, which is more slower. Definitely back to sort of almost doomier feel a bit, because there is a little bit some doomier stuff, like with Dues to Pay, and then The Healer. But Going Down is kind of that same sort of thing, but I think it's some of the best, the more doomier sounding tracks on the album, because it still has a punch to it. Still great track. And of course, then finally with the Lie to Me and Violator, which are both straight up upbeat, scorching rockers. They both have great sounds. Again, every bit of that sort of classic Axewitch sound, though again, very updated to kind of fit the more modern sort of era. It still sounds like Axewitch, and it still is a very inspired album. I love this. I would say this is almost on par with the album that Torch released last year, which is Reignited. It's almost on the same par as that album. Just great shit. And again, both classic Swedish heavy metal bands. The only band left to actually release a new album is Heavy Load. Still great stuff. Finally, I guess to kind of give you my thoughts on the two bonus tracks for the CD, which are re-recordings of the songs Nightmare and Axewitch. You know what? They're good updated renditions of those two songs, but I still somewhat prefer the originals. So I think, if anything, they don't really add much to the album, but they're not egregious in many ways. They don't really make me feel like I've just been insulted. Instead, they're just fine, modern renditions of them. Again, very updated, again, but they don't really add anything to the album because the album itself is already strong enough to begin with. So the two songs, I'm not going to really count into let's say, my rating for this review. But it still is a good. They're still good re-recordings, anyways. But again, they're not really essential at all. So there we go. There it is. There is my thoughts on the comeback album from Axewitch, Out of the Ashes into the Fire, and my final rating, since I've got it all written down here. It's a 9.97 out of 10. This is easily some of the most strongest material that they've put out in a long time, because again, this easily smokes Hooked on High Heels. I mean, Hooked on High Heels was not a bad record, but it wasn't a great record anyways. Again, they were trying to really cash in on the sort of glammy, sort of very, very, very commercial, more MTV style metal sound. That sort of, again, major label, like stuff like Atlantic Records or so on, that sort of sound. But I think, if anything, it fell flat. Because again, while there was a quirky, their first two releases being, or first three, again, counting the Pray for Metal EP, then, of course, The Lord of the Flies and Visions of the Past, while they were very young sounding, and they were still good albums, but again, they were definitely more raw, a little bit unfocused, I guess, in some cases, but still, there was a quirkiness to them that added at least a bit of a charm to those two full-length albums. And with this one, of course, with age, you always expect them to get much more better and more mature in terms of their tightness of their playing, and that's what you get with this album. Everything that was good about those albums has been updated, but maybe just a little bit more. Again, I can't really help myself but not rave this album, because this is good. This is a really good fucking record. They did a great job with this comeback album, and I hope all of you actually enjoy this comeback album. Again, it's been out since April 30th, so if you have heard this album, you can leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Whether if you did like the album or you did not like the album, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you want to really check out Axewitch and you want to kind of start up with something more brand new, this is a good album. Again, it's the only new album that they've released. So with that, I hope that this is a good album for you, and I hope this actually turns you on to at least to Axewitch. So with that, hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I am out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.